morning and welcome to the Daily Geeky Pastimes Podcast, episode 23. I think I actually got the number right this time because I'm pretty sure yesterday I said it was 21, when it was actually 22. It's just a weird quirk of the way I create the YouTube streams that some of the time I haven't updated the number from the day before, and then by then I've forgotten, and the numbers won't make sense when I talk about them at the beginning. But if you look at the title of the video or the podcast, they should all be right, so you can sort of stay in order. Just don't freak out if I say the same number as I said the day before. Sorry. Anyway, today might be the most interesting podcast I've had. Like, I don't have a guest or anything like that. I don't have an interview. And I know a lot of those things are super exciting, and we definitely want to do more in future. But we've got a topic that I've been trying to put in a podcast for literally, I would say, 10 episodes, so about half the time that the podcast's been going. And then every time I've tried to do this topic, something else has come up. Like some other event has happened, someone's agreed to be on a show or whatever's happened, and I've not been able to do it. And that's a real shame. And then this morning, for some reason, I woke up and I hadn't actually planned this out last night. Normally, I kind of write a set of notes for what I want to talk about, and I hadn't done it. And then I was having my shower in the morning, doing the normal shower thoughts, and I was thinking, oh, well, I can talk about this. And then like, oh, I can talk about this. Oh, I can talk about this. And then I normally get on my computer like an hour before the podcast goes live and just read through all of the different news sites. And then I found a few things about the topic of today's podcast and was like, oh, this is interesting. And then found more and more things are interesting. And now I've ended up with the longest set of notes I've ever had for a podcast, which is saying something. This podcast has gone on for 2 hours before. And just like loads of kind of I think genuinely interesting thoughts on this topic. That's some crazy hubris, isn't it? But some interesting thoughts on this topic that I think are worth talking about, and it's something important. And to make it even more exciting, I'm going to make some predictions in this podcast that you can hold me accountable to. Some things that I'm pretty sure are going to happen that I haven't heard anyone else talk about yet, but I'm going to say them, and then you're going to be able to look back and you're going to be able to say, hey, I was there. I was listening to Geeky when he predicted this 2 years ago, and I pressed like on a stream as soon as he said that. Please do press like on a stream. Anyway, the main topic of today is going to be about how AI is going to change gaming. And I originally put like, how could AI change gaming as the title? And then I changed it to how will AI change gaming? Because I'm like almost certain it will, and I don't think it's going to be a long way away, but we'll talk about that later. Before that, just in terms of what I've been playing, yesterday I was playing a lot of Redfall. This is a game that I have a sponsored video in the works for, so I think like that disclaimer is quite important. I got the code for free and they are paying me to make a video about the game, so I can understand if people are like listening to me and being like, oh, he's just saying stuff because they're paying him. And I would probably think the same if I was listening to another creator. That's a perfectly reasonable thing to think. But honestly, I'm having a really good time with the game. It's exactly how I saw it when I played it a few months ago, when I played it at the Bethesda offices. It's not like they've made any huge improvements from then, but it's a lot of fun. Like, there's a lot of fun to be had. I played it yesterday, probably like an hour solo. Then I played a little bit just with Cobb. And then Flynn came on and we played a bunch of it in trios. We ended up playing for like 4 hours. I had a really good time. It's definitely one of those games where I think you need to set your expectations in check before you go in. Like, if you go in thinking, oh my God, this is going to be like Dishonored but multiplayer, or this is going to be like Prey but multiplayer, it's not. Like, it just isn't that game. But if you kind of know what Arcane is like and the way they build games, and I know this isn't like Arcane Leon, I know this is a different Arcane studio. These are the people that worked on Prey, which is a game that I absolutely loved. The second Prey, not the first Prey. But yeah, Prey I like absolutely loved. I thought that game was spectacular. It's also the gameplay director. I think he's the guy who did Dishonored 1, the guy who actually was the director on this game. But yeah, it's like got that Arcane thing of you can go to locations in the game that aren't important to the story. They're not important to making a more powerful character or anything like that. And you can just find stuff that's a bit weird and a bit creative and a bit interesting. And that side of it is fun. I also like the shooting side of it. I think the shooting is fun. I think a lot of the fights are quite fun. Even if it's a bit easy, I might try putting the difficulty up today maybe. Although I don't want bullet spongy enemies. I don't know how I want the difficulty to be different. I think the problem is actually, funnily enough, AI. But the shooting feels quite satisfying, and getting new weapons is quite fun at the moment. I'm quite enjoying that side of it. And like the abilities and stuff like that aren't the best, but the way you can move around the map, I think is really cool. Like you've got this sort of fairly small open world, but that means you can get across it quite quickly. And sometimes you'll see your objectives in a building, and immediately, like once you've played the, or not immediately, probably after you've played the game for like an hour, you start looking at it being like, okay, I could probably pick one of those doors, or I might be able to find a window somewhere higher up that lets me in, or there might be a way in on the roof. And you start doing that thing that you kind of do in Dishonored of just looking at buildings almost like a puzzle box and being like, okay, how am I going to get into this building using the minimum amount of resources? Like what's going to be like the most fun way to start a fight? Like, do I want to get high up before I start a fight? Do I want to try and stealthily take a few out? Or do I just want to like throw C4 in? If you're Flynn, apparently you just always throw C4 in. There's a bit in yesterday's stream. I was streaming all of this on twitch.tv/Geeky Pastimes, and I'll be streaming some more of it today after the podcast. But there's a bit yesterday where I was like, okay, let's go sneaky, and I crept up behind a person and like meleeed him in the back, which is a one-hit kill in Redfall. And then as I did that, a piece of C4 flew past my head into a bathroom. Like not into, like we weren't outside, we weren't in like a military base or something. We were in a residential house where I was saying, let's go sneaky, and a piece of C4 just flew past my ear into a bathroom, then exploded and killed a bunch of people. And it was like, oh, okay, that's Flynn's idea of being sneaky. That's good. He swears he threw it before I said that, but I'm not sure. But yeah, I don't know. It led to lots of funny moments. I'm very much enjoying the game. I think there's some really fun, like environmental storytelling in it, which is probably my favorite thing that Arcane does. I'm having a good time with it, and I know, like, I can see a lot of the complaints that people have about it are perfectly legitimate. Like, there's a lot of things that could be much better about it. Performance is bad, AI is bad, the environment can be bland in some places, but I saw a Kotaku headline this morning that was like, people aren't having fun in Redfall, and I almost wanted to leave a comment on the article being like, I'm having fun. Like, I know I've been a like statistical outlier with a lot of kind of critical consensus type things about games this year. You know, I didn't like Dead Space and Resident Evil 4 that much. I didn't like Jedi Survivor. I did like Dead Island 2. I did like Forspoken. I know I've kind of like been contrary to a lot of like popular opinions about games lately. You know, Warzone 2 I think has been getting worse with all of the changes that they've been making. I preferred it at launch, but you know, I'm enjoying it. I'm having a good time. That article actually, I was thinking about leaving a reply, a snarky reply, being like, I'm enjoying the game. And then I read the first comment was the author of the article leaving a comment on his own article saying like, hey, and look at these fonts I was talking about. Look how terrible they are. And he was using an example of the Level Up font, which I think is really cool. Weirdly, when I got to play it, when I went to Bethesda, one of the things I pointed out was like, oh, this Level Up font is really cool. And it's like, that was something this person had like decided to point out as something that was bad about the game. And I was like, oh, I quite like that font. I thought it was nice. Anyway, that's Redfall. In terms of gaming news, we've got a few news stories today, but I'm going to rattle through them because, like I said, we've got lots to talk about today. First of all, this is just an article that I think you should read. There's an amazing interview up on Eurogamer with the designer for Marvel Snap. Marvel Snap, for anyone who doesn't know, is a free-to-play mobile game. It's a card battler set in the Marvel universe, and I know that doesn't sound very exciting, but this game is amazing. I've been playing it for months at this point. I'm still really enjoying it. I'm still thinking about it a lot. I find myself like, now it's the thing I do rather than just scrolling Twitter when I'm on my phone. I'll just load up Marvel Snap. And it gets so much right. Like, there's so many interesting cards in it. There's so many interesting ways to play. But at its heart, it's very simple. It's very easy to understand. Like, I always understand why someone's beaten me or when I've beaten someone else. There's not that much luck involved in it. There's some, just enough for you to sometimes have bad luck, sometimes have good luck, but it's not too bad. It's just like, I don't know, it's got this perfect balance of simplicity and depth. And the matches only last about 3 minutes, which is a perfect amount of time, I think, for a phone game. Just awesome game. Absolutely love it. And yeah, Eurogamer has an article. I put the link in the description. And it's worth reading. It's like talks a lot about the Agatha Harkness card and like the design philosophy behind that, but also touches on some other things about like, you know, player expectation, what players think is going on, how like easy it is to mislead players. They talk about a card that, you know, people have thought for ages that there must be some complex AI involved in it, and then the developers like, nope, 100% random. Just players are reading too much into it. And I love stuff like that. I love it when people online, the terminally online, say like they are completely sure about something because it makes sense in their head. Like when I talked about gamers being entitled and stuff like that. They've come up with an idea of how something works, and they're just sure they're right because the logic checks out in their own brain. And then you have the person that actually made the thing being like, nope, that's not how that works. And I think that's funny. It's like, Call of Duty's had examples of that loads. Like when I remember someone making some big fuss on Twitter or Reddit or something, and they were saying like, oh, I wish we could go back to the old Call of Duty. Call of Duty was so much better with like Black Ops 2 when we didn't have skill-based matchmaking. And then like the specific developer, the specific engineer who coded skill-based matchmaking into Black Ops 2 was like, nope, definitely always been there. I am the person that put skill-based matchmaking into Black Ops 2. It's definitely been there since at least then. And I think his implication of his post was it's been there before then too. Basically, as long as there's been matchmaking in Call of Duty. Because I don't think there was any matchmaking in Call of Duty 1, but there was from Call of Duty 2 onwards, I'm pretty sure. But yeah, like it's just like absolutely there has been skill-based matchmaking basically forever in Call of Duty. And then in when Blackout was out, the Black Ops 4 Battle Royale, there was a thing where there was a big fuss. I talk about it quite a lot on stream, that there's always an idea in Call of Duty that there's something to blame for you doing badly. Whether it's the meta, whether it's cheating, whether it's the way people are playing, camping, drop shotting, something like that, whether it's, desync or some sort of network thing or whatever, there's always an excuse. Like, the sort of streamers you watch, sometimes you'll watch some people playing, or you might have friends who do this, and every time they die, it's not their fault, and it's always something. And there's at least flavor of the week kind of things that everyone blames stuff on. And, one big creator says it, and then everyone else parrots it for like the next month. And the thing at the time in Blackout was the server tick rate, which recently came back again. Like that was one of the new fashions that, returned from the dead. And yeah, like people were complaining about the Blackout tick rate, and loads of people were like, oh, this is unplayable. I can't play it because the tick rate is like so low, whatever. And people were complaining about it loads. And then at some point, Treyarch just came out and said like, oh yeah, we fixed that a couple of months ago. And like they'd fixed it like quite a long time before and just not told anyone. And I to this day think that someone was doing this to prove a point that was completely lost on a lot of people. That people were still complaining about the tick rate in the intervening time when it was fixed, when it was like upgraded or whatever, like increased. People were still saying like, oh, it's obvious, like I died because the tick rate is like 20 hertz or whatever. And then the developer was like, no, we fixed that a couple of months ago. Tick rate's like 45 or whatever, 60. And I just thought that was really interesting. I thought that was really funny. I love it when stuff like that happens. Anyway, other news. Street Fighter 6 demo came out. I know this came out a few days ago, but I only played it last night, basically. There's a Street Fighter 6 demo. The menus are awful in it just because they've like taken the game and cut out most of the content, which makes sense for a demo. But it means that like the menus don't work very well. They're not very intuitive because you can't access most of it. You can't even like select it on the menu, which means navigating stuff is weirdly harder. Even getting to options, you can't get to the options page in the game, which is very annoying. But anyway, it's got like a little bit of the single play. It's got like the normal arcade stuff where you're fighting like one-on-one, and that feels really solid. Like it feels really good. As someone that isn't super into fighting games, I'm not into the competitive side of them, but I really love playing them just messing around against my friends. Street Fighter 6 feels super good. Like it feels like a really good Street Fighter game. In my mind, it feels better than Street Fighter 5 and 4. I liked the way Street Fighter 4 looked a lot, but this, I think, plays better at least. It's very chunky, very sort of visceral, very easy to tell what every attack is and how it's working and stuff. I think it's got that good balance, again, of like complexity and simplicity. They've done a really good job of that. But the more interesting thing is like there's also the single player mode where you create a character and then you run around the city that's called like Metro City, but it's obviously New York. But you run around the city and do quests, and it's got this hilarious thing where you can walk up to, there's like a bunch of NPCs wandering around, just normal people going around their lives in this city, like in New York City. And some of them have levels above their head. Not all of them, but like a lot of them. Like, in the first area, there's probably like 30 people wandering around with levels over their head. And they're just people. Like, they're just normal people wandering around. you can walk up to any of them, press X, and you immediately just go like, "Hoo!" And they do the same, like crossing their arms with you, and then you fight, like you just beat them up, or they beat you up. And it's like, there's even at one point, one of the little quests is you need to go buy a slice of pizza, because it's just, a tutorial showing you how you can get health back and stuff. And you get two choices when you speak to the pizza guy. It's like, you can buy pizza or you can fight him. It's like, you can just fight the vendor, which I just think is really funny. I'm not sure. I didn't actually fight him. I don't know. Do you get pizza if you beat him? I don't know. But I thought that was really funny. There's problems with it. Like, the frame rate's terrible for some reason in that mode. In the normal Street Fighter mode, it's like absolutely fine. Like, it runs butter smooth. It looks amazing. In the character creator mode, the single player thing, it's like, it feels like it's running at 30 frames a second, which for a fighting game is bad, like really bad. So hopefully that gets fixed at some point, or hopefully there's like a performance mode in the options, because it feels like the game looks better than it needs to. Like, there's fancy reflections and stuff. I just want to turn all of that off and just have 60 frames a second fighting. But yeah, anyway, Street Fighter 6 demo available. I played it on Xbox. It's really good. It's really fun. It's very funny to play. I enjoyed it a lot. Only 2 characters out in the normal fighting mode. It's just Ryu and Luke. But like in the character creator, obviously you can create whatever you want. And I assume, I don't know for sure, I assume you will be able to use your custom characters in the normal mode at some point. I don't know how that works. The next news story, very quickly, Star Wars stuff was added to Fortnite. Someone told me about this in chat. I checked out the trailer. It looks fair enough. I don't care like that much. I like Fortnite. I go back to it very occasionally. It doesn't run very well on my PC. I really struggle to get smooth performance with the Unreal 5 stuff on it for whatever reason. I feel like Unreal 5 just doesn't work very well with my PC. I don't know why, but all the games I've played that use Unreal 5 in any way feel like they chug a little bit, like they just have issues. Whereas it runs brilliantly on my console, runs amazingly on that. But yeah, I haven't played much Fortnite for a while, just because I only really play it when there's a new character I want. And then I got the Xenomorph from Alien, and it's like, I don't really want anything else. I just want to play as that all the time. But I haven't played it for a while, and I probably won't go back for this. But I do think it's interesting. Someone did a post on Reddit of like, here's all of the Star Wars characters that are in Fortnite. And there's a bunch now, loads of different clone troopers. There's stormtroopers. There's like Maul. I think there's probably Palpatine. I don't know. Obviously Darth Vader's in it. There's like Padme, Anakin Skywalker, Obi-Wan. There's a bunch of different people in it. And it does make me think, like, with all of the stuff they've done with Fortnite Creative, are we getting to the point where someone could make a relatively convincing Star Wars game in Fortnite? Like, when people want a new Battlefront game, are we getting close to a point where people could make a decent Battlefront game in Fortnite using officially licensed characters? I don't know. I've got no idea how all of that stuff works, but it seems like that's possible, which would be really interesting if we get like the next Star Wars Battlefront is just some like fan-made thing on Fortnite. That'd be crazy. There's also, next news story, Gran Turismo has a movie trailer out. It's fine. I think Gran Turismo is a super weird choice for a video game movie adaptation, just because Gran Turismo is maybe the most soulless game I've ever played. Like, maybe if I thought of games where there aren't characters or a story, Gran Turismo would probably be quite near the top of the list. Like, it's just a weird game that I've always had a kind of respect for Gran Turismo in terms of the car collection and sometimes in terms of the simulation, although I still prefer the way Forza does all of that stuff, especially for presentation of all of that stuff. But there's no heart to it. I never think, like, I just think Gran Turismo is a perfect sort of game for people who are super into cars, and that's enough. Like, the cars are the characters and nothing else matters. Like, the human side of Gran Turismo is always weird. Like, in Gran Turismo 7, the human side is super weird. It's just a load of people who are like, hey, go do races in these cars, or go buy these cars, and then I'm going to tell you about them and tell you the history of them. It's really odd. But yeah, so there's a Gran Turismo movie coming out. Like, I think driving game movies can work. Need for Speed, I thought was a fun time. I thought that was a good movie. Not a good movie, but you know what I mean? It was an enjoyable movie, so it's good in my books. It was a lot better than I thought it would be. I just think, like, you think of all of the driving games that they could have made a film about, and Gran Turismo would not be in the top 10 of my list. You know what would be top? Split Second, that Disney racing game. That was amazing. And that could make such a cool movie. The idea of this like TV company going further and further to make races exciting. I think that would be awesome. But yeah, anyway. So that is a thing that is out. You can watch it. And talking of movies, obviously one thing that doesn't really affect gaming as much as far as I know, but will affect movies and TV very dramatically, is the writer's strike. So the Writing Guild, what's it called? The Writers Guild of America? Is that the WGA, the Writers Guild of America? I think that's it. Anyway, they're going on strike again, and we don't have to guess so much about what the effect of this will be because we've been through this before. This happened, was like 15 years ago. It happened quite a long time ago. But when it happened before, it massively affected TV and films. Like, it had a huge effect. So TV shows disappeared for a long while, and when a TV show disappears for a long while, that means that a lot of the actors get older, which can be a big problem. It means that a lot of things, like they can't keep the sets anymore, so shows end up getting cancelled because they just can't keep paying for all of the stuff that they needed in the meantime, so everyone starts working on other projects. It means that stories get changed dramatically. So I was reading a thing yesterday saying that in Breaking Bad, apparently Hank was meant to die in the first season, but because of the writer's strike, that sort of changed all of that stuff and meant that they made completely different plans for it. Obviously, movies where there's meant to be like things coming out soon, so but especially things like the Marvel universe, the Star Wars extended universe stuff, the new DC James Gunn universe, all of those things end up getting put on hold, and that causes problems with their release schedule. It means that we'll probably in like 2 years have a weird time where there's no blockbuster movies coming out. Or maybe a year, I don't know quite how timelines work for movies. But like I remember there being like a big chunk of time where it's just like suddenly the impact of the Writers Guild strike meant that there was like no big movies coming out. And it's a kind of interesting because it means a lot of like indie movies that are often quicker to make end up getting like put in cinemas because cinemas need something on their screens. So they end up putting a lot more sort of like quirky, interesting, like original movies start appearing because they're things that like weren't affected by the writer's strike so much, or things that just after the writer's strike ends, then they start up and they finish production early and they finish before the blockbusters do, so they're sort of there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, like I said, we probably won't feel the impact of it probably on TV for a few months, like a year, and then in cinemas for a couple of years. But when it happens, it's kind of interesting. It does mean that if you're like super into an ongoing show or film series, like good luck. I hope your show or film series survives this because I'm not sure if it's actually going to. It's not the Film Actors Guild. Definitely not. And Microcept just said, you see they're making a Twisted Metal TV series. Yeah, I did see that trailer. It didn't really do anything for me. I've got no nostalgia for Twisted Metal. I played the PlayStation 3 one, I think, but I never played the old ones just because I didn't have PlayStations when I was growing up. But yeah, I don't have any nostalgia for it, but people seem excited about it. It looks kind of silly to me, but fair enough. I'm sure it'll be fine. My wife was complaining that Sweet Tooth is the name of a character because there's a comic book series, I think, called Sweet Tooth that she likes. And then when they talk about making films and stuff for that, if you ever search on YouTube for Sweet Tooth, you find all of this stuff about Twisted Metal, which is a bit annoying. But yeah, anyway, that's all. And then finally, the last little update is really just for any of you who are content creators, any of you who are streamers. If you use OBS and you use different scene collections, download a new update. Like, even if you were already on the beta for the new OBS update, go to check for updates, download the new stable version. It lets you change scene collections almost instantly, which is amazing. Like, it used to take me like 10 seconds sometimes to change scene collections, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but it means you can't do it while streaming. Now I can, which isn't something I'll do very often, but it's just a really nice quality of life thing. I'm so happy they made it so you can do it. They also made it so you can stream on AV1 and stuff like that. All the stuff from the beta branch is now in the main one. You can, in the simple recording mode, you can record stuff with different audio tracks, which is very useful if you do gameplay for stuff, but you're also talking on Discord. Yeah, really, really cool update. Very, very nice. If you use OBS, download the new update. It is super, super good. Anyway, let's get on to the main topic. Sorry I rushed through that a little bit, but I 100% want to get onto the main topic, and that is AI in gaming. So, lots of thoughts on this. So AI obviously is already used in gaming. Like, we have AI in gaming, and AI is not a particularly useful term because as far as it says artificial intelligence, it's not really intelligent, is it? Like, I mean, maybe at some point it will become that, but at the moment it's more like automation. It's more automated decision making. So it's more like, okay, computers can look at a set of inputs and decide what to do about them based on a set of rules. And in the past, the AI has always been like fairly understandable by humans, fairly understandable by of being like, okay, if this, then this. And even AI in gaming, you know, when you have NPCs running around and doing stuff, it's essentially like branching logic. It's like, is there a player within 15 feet? If there is, run towards them, shoot at them. You know, and sometimes it gets more complex than that, where it's like, okay, is there cover within 5 feet? If there is, hide behind the cover, crouch, then shoot at the player. Is your health below 20%? If it is, then start backing off, retreating. Like, some games have more complex AI, some games have extremely simple AI. It's also used in development, so things like game testing will often use a lot of like automation, so they'll be able to run things through games, you know, where they'll run something lots of times, like pathing and stuff like that, to look for errors in level geometry and stuff. You know, if you run a character that just does random movement inputs through a level a million times, they're probably going to find some of the problems, and you couldn't pay someone to run through a level a million times. You know, there's not enough time in the universe. So stuff like that is already a thing, and it has been a thing for a very long time. But there's this new type of AI. So you've seen it in stuff like ChatGPT, Midjourney, DALL-E. There's this new type of AI, and it sort of seems to synthesize stuff based on language inputs using a big set of data. So rather than just having like, if this, then this, it's much more like, okay, this is the words you've asked for. What kind of output are you looking for? And then it can create that output using a massive library of different ideas and different images that it's cataloged in some way. And one of the really interesting things about AI, at least from my perspective, is that generally the people that made it don't really understand what it's doing, because the way they're doing it is kind of training it. It's called training it, where you give it like some inputs and a method, like an algorithm that lets it learn, and then it will give you an output, and you can say that was a bad output or that was a good output, and then it will refine its algorithm for the next time and get better at giving you outputs. And you can keep on doing this, like iterating through it over and over and over again, until eventually the AI has its own rule set of how to interpret words, how to create outputs, how to use different things, what to modify. And people won't really understand the code because they don't need to. Like, the AI's created it itself. It's basically been given a chance to like edit its own algorithm. And again, this isn't actually anything that new. Like YouTube, for a long while, the people who work on YouTube, the algorithm that decides what video to show you, will openly say they don't really understand exactly why YouTube will choose one video over another. Because it's like a numbers problem, that there's just too many people using YouTube, there's too many different users, everyone's got their own personal preferences, there's too many videos on YouTube, and there's more videos being added all the time. There's no way a human can catalog any of that in a sensible way. So instead, they've got this algorithm that learns, and it, you know, looks at things like, hey, I showed you this video and you just scrolled straight past it. You didn't care about it. So what can I say, look at about this video and all the other videos you scrolled past that means that they're less appealing to you? I'm not going to show you those anymore. Or you watch this video, but then you close the app down. I don't want to show you any more videos that you close the app down after you watch them. So let's find other videos where after you watch them, you then watch another one. And sometimes that might lead the algorithm to do things that seem counterintuitive. Like, for example, if you are watching a guide for something, if you watch a guide for something on YouTube and it tells you exactly what to do, you might watch the guide, then turn off YouTube. If you watch a bad guide for something, you might watch it and then be like, oh, that didn't really explain what I needed to do, so I'm going to watch another guide. From YouTube's perspective, that's quite a good thing. Like, that's a positive thing. You stayed on the app, you watched more adverts, you spent more time there. So they might recommend more bad guides to you because a good guide that's super informative isn't actually as good, which is kind of interesting. And something I've been thinking about a little bit lately with some of my guides. A lot of my guides, you might have noticed if you've been looking at some of my DMZ things, they're a lot more like focusing on the entertainment side of it and just showing you some fun gameplay and not being too specific about what you have to do. Partly because of that idea of like, if I just make something and tell someone exactly what to do, the only people who will care about that video are people who are trying to solve that exact problem. And YouTube will be like, oh, well, they didn't watch it for very long because they just skipped to the bit they needed to do, and then they switched off the app, so like it doesn't get recommended to more people. And all of my stats and stuff on my videos have gone up since I've been doing that, so it's obviously working. And that's an interesting way where like AI is already being used. It's doing something that humans probably wouldn't have thought of by themselves, and now like you can kind of change your behavior based on that. So my point anyway is that AI is already being used. And this new AI is like this idea of having AI that's doing something we don't entirely understand based on something we want it to be able to achieve is rapidly progressing, like super fast progressing. And when I say rapidly, I don't mean like, oh, this is some sort of tech thing. When we talk about VR or we talk about augmented reality or we talk about quantum computing or stuff like that, and we say like, oh, this will really affect games in 20 years. The speed this is changing is like, this is going to change gaming in 2 years. Like, for indie games, I would imagine a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about today is we're going to see it this year in indie games. And I wouldn't be surprised if we saw it in AAA games in like less than 5 years, in like 3 or 4 years, because kind of you think of how long a development cycle is of a game. People who are having ideas now about how AI could be used in gaming will be starting to make their games based around it now, and then they'll probably come out in like 3 years. And GDC, the Game Developers Conference 2023, the one in the US the other day, like, what was that, a month ago, a few weeks ago? That, like, loads of talks were about AI. Again, Eurogamer actually have an article where they go through a load of the main points from it that's worth a read. But, like, once GDC really is going hard on something and there's loads of talks about something, that kind of means developers are taking notice, and this is something that is being seriously considered and is going to get used a lot. One of the interesting things in that was there was someone from King, the people who make Candy Crush. They were talking about it, and they were saying about how they're using it to generate new levels, because Candy Crush has like hundreds, thousands of levels, and they were saying that they've got like 250 million players at any given time. Like, they can't create levels that everyone's going to like, but they can use AI to create levels that individual people will like. And they can't even test all of those levels because there's too many. So they can use AI to create and test these levels and then just ship them without humans ever really being that involved in the process, which is just insane. And that sounds like that's already something that's doing. And obviously Candy Crush is a lot simpler than something like Call of Duty. But it's interesting that it's already something where it's like, hey, this is a problem. We can use AI to solve this problem at scale. We can use this to do something that would otherwise be impossible with humans. And that's like where all of this stuff gets really cool. Now, before we talk about how AI is going to be used in gaming, it's worth talking about all of the big ethical problems. Or not all of them, but the major ones that come up again. The big one, I would say, that comes up from lots of artists particularly, is that AI at the moment, like DALL-E and Midjourney, and even ChatGPT in a way, but especially the arty ones with images stuff, they're stealing stuff. Like, they are taking things from other artists. So if you type a prompt into something like DALL-E or Midjourney and you're like, hey, I want to see a picture of Master Chief standing in front of a volcano, both that volcano and that picture of Master Chief, if you look around the internet, you'll probably be able to find something that an artist has done that is very, very similar to it, that the AI has used to sort of composite it together and make something that looks new, but it is using someone else's art. And obviously, this becomes a very thorny issue because most of the time, these bots have been trained on libraries of art where the artists weren't ever asked. The artists weren't ever asked about whether their stuff can be used in this. And it's not like, if I'm making a thumbnail and I went on DeviantArt and took someone's art from there and then just put it in my thumbnail, even if I changed the background or something like that, that would be a pretty crappy thing to do because I'm not paying that artist for the use of their work. That's like a copyright problem. So this becomes a problem with the AIs of, like, a lot of the time, the end user can't even find out who originally created the art. It would be very hard for anyone to tell you exactly whose art was used. And you might create a picture that uses the art of like 20 different people. But it is something that someone else has worked on, someone else has put their effort into, and now you're essentially using it, kind of for free, or you're paying DALL-E or Midjourney and the artist isn't seeing a penny. Now, that, I think, was a much bigger issue with the early versions. Like Midjourney now, we're on Midjourney 5 just came out. increasingly, as they've progressed, as they've become more sophisticated, it's harder to tell where the original thing comes from. You know, you look at Midjourney 5 and it's creating things that basically look photoreal in some cases. I mean, I'm sure lots of you have seen the Balenciaga videos on YouTube that I'm kind of half addicted to. I find them really funny, where it's like, you know, like characters from some show, but dressed in Balenciaga at a fashion show talking about how Balenciaga is so amazing. And they're very funny, and like some of them are much better than others. But like, it's shocking how realistic some of those things are, and they move. You know, some of them are like have elements that look a bit like video, and they talk with the people's things. And it's like you could probably find the photos that they're kind of based on, but it's much more like they've created new costumes that are inspired by those things rather than just taking those clothes. And I think as this progresses, and like I said, it is progressing rapidly. Like in a year, it's insane the amount of progress these are like the improvements in this, because I don't think it's something that's hardware limited. It's something that's software limited, which means people aren't waiting for new things to be invented in terms of hardware. The people who are making this stuff, they're just finding new ways to solve problems and finding ways to make it more efficient and stuff. But yeah, so I think very, very soon it's going to get to the point where you can't identify any artist's work. And if you can't identify any particular artist's work, then you're getting into the grounds of inspiration rather than plagiarism. And that's much more difficult. And I can understand entirely why a lot of artists are worried about this and why a lot of artists are bothered by it. But it's like, I don't know what the laws are like this, but I'm sure every artist looks at someone else's art and is like, that's really cool. I'm going to try and take like the way they did lighting on that, or that use of color, or that shape, or whatever. They're inspired by stuff and they copy it to some degree and incorporate it into their own work. You know, like I've got an art A level, you know, actually, no, I don't have an art A level. I dropped out, but I started an art A level. And when I started my art A level, you know, what you're doing essentially when you're, and I imagine the same goes into proper art school when you go to college or university, is looking at famous artists and being like, how did they do that? Why did they do that? How does that work? And then trying to incorporate those skills, those techniques into your own work. And the creative side is really important. The idea of making something that's your own and finding your own voice in it is important. But to pretend that like you're not ever going to copy what someone else has done just seems crazy. And the same applies to music. The same applies to like acting. Like actors have people who inspired them. You know, they'll look at people like great actors from the past and be like, okay, like I really like the way they did that. I'm going to try and learn how they did that and then try and copy it. That's why there's acting schools run by former actors and stuff. So there's like, once you start crossing over to the point where you can't identify what the original is, but, you know, maybe there's a bit of a style or a bit of a hook created by something, and then, like, it's been turned into something different, does that become less of a legal issue? The other thing that I think will solve this problem is that the EU have started putting in some draft legislation that I can imagine getting passed, where the people who create these AIs have to publish, well, all of the names of all of the work, the sources of all the work that they use to train the AI. And I can imagine it getting to a point where the AI is trained on a library of work where all of those artists have been compensated in some way. You know, if you get something where it's like, hey, are you happy for your work to be put into this AI library? We'll pay you $50, we'll pay you $500, we'll pay you $5,000, you know, depending on the level of the artist and the amount of work and stuff like that. And those deals will start to get done, which suddenly means the pool of available work will shrink massively, but the legal side of it will get worked out in a way. I can imagine that happening. I think that's possible. To be honest, though, I think the AI will just leapfrog it. The AI will just leapfrog it and start to being like, hey, give me pictures of the real world and I'll use that instead. Which will be interesting. So yeah, that's a big problem. The other big problem with AI that I've seen lots of people talking about and lots of people having an issue is that, oh, sorry, Affa's just had a good point in chat that Ed Sheeran's been using that argument in his court case. Ed Sheeran, if you don't know, has been in courts for like years now, and he's constantly accused of stealing stuff. And he appears in court, and in public trials in the US, it gets on the news because, you know, it's interesting listening to an artist talk about their work. And he's been making the big point of like, everyone grows up listening to music and appreciating music, and you're going to be inspired by that. And some things can't be copyrighted. Like he's saying that, you can't copyright a chord progression because like they're used in so many different things. And I think the same arguments will be made about art and stuff like that. You can't copyright colors, unless it's like Vantablack or whatever. But like you can't copyright like the basic building blocks of stuff. So once you get past whatever qualifies as like something that would be be able to be copyrighted, some arrangement or whatever, then surely you're getting into grounds where you could get away from it. It's interesting. Alex Andrew said you guys should watch Michio Kaku before calling software AI. I did address that at the beginning of this about how artificial intelligence is a bad phrase for this, but the way language works, when you say AI like ChatGPT and Midjourney and DALL-E, everyone understands what you mean. So it doesn't really matter that it's not true intelligence, that it's just predictive, or it's just sort of like branching logic. It's like people understand what you mean. You don't need to be pedantic about it. So use language in a way that other people do, because that's what language is. It's a consensus. It's not, no one has authority over it unless you're like the Academy of France. Was it the National Academy? Is it the French one where they try really hard to make everyone in France use the French word for email rather than the English word, but it doesn't work because language is a consensus. It's like when you get people saying like, oh, you can't use the word decimate in that thing because decimate means killing 1 in 10 and they didn't kill 1 in 10. It's like, that's not how people use that word. Like, there is no authority on language that makes sense. Like, language is just how people use it. The fact that people use literally to mean figuratively is fine because so many people use it now. That's just what the word means now. You understand it. As long as you understand it from context. And in this situation, we understand what we mean when we're talking about AI. Then it's fine. I get that like there'll be some people that will mistake all of this and think that we're talking about some sentient robot living in a box creating art, but that's their problem. That's not our problem. Anyway, sorry, what I was going to say, the other big problem that a lot of artists bring up, and I see this a lot more with writers than anything, because writers, suddenly being threatened by AI, and with the writers' strike and everything, it's become a popular issue this week, is that when you see something written by AI, it's obviously not written by a human. It's obviously not as good. It doesn't have intention behind it. It doesn't have human experience behind it, and therefore it will never be as good. And I've seen I know Alana Pierce, who is one of the people who wrote for God of War Ragnarok, talking about this on her podcast. And I think that's kind of missing the point, personally. I think yes, there'll probably always be some sort of difference between something written by a human and something written by an AI. And I think that difference will be fairly obvious for a while. But that doesn't mean the stuff that's written by an AI is useless. I think it's different. And that's kind of interesting in some ways, because while, okay, AI is never going to write something the same as what a human would write, where there's lots of complex nuances in the language and stuff like that. An AI might also write something that a human could never write. An AI might do something with language that humans wouldn't think of because it's not governed by the same rules and, traditions and expectations. It might be creative in other ways, and it might do stuff that you don't expect. In the same way that, you can see beauty in something like, looking at a cloud or a mountain. These are things that were created without actual consciousness and without intelligence. Sorry, I'm not religious. But they can still be beautiful. They can still be amazing. Having a set of rules that creates something could create something that's equally good. And I've spent my entire life growing up thinking, when I was a kid, I thought I think most people do, that artists are geniuses, that artists are important, that artists matter. And when you're appreciating art, really you're trying to work out what the artist intended by it. I think most people who aren't super into art and who aren't super into literature and stuff like that, they will watch a, or film or whatever. They'll watch a film, or they'll look at a painting, or they will hear a poem, or they will read a book, and they will be slightly anxious about whether they've got the right interpretation or not. You put 10 normal people into a book club, get them to read a book bloody Ulysses by James Joyce. I think most of them will be worried about saying what they thought the book was about, because they aren't sure if they're right. Same as if you go to the National Portrait Gallery in London, you can go there, it's free. Go into the portrait gallery, look at some of these paintings, and then if someone came up to you and was like, so what do you think what do you think this painting means? Like, what do you think this is trying to show? You'll be thinking like there's a right and a wrong answer. You'll be thinking like, what did the artist intend? What were they trying to show? Not what does it show? And then when you get to like university level, so I've got an English literature degree, you get taught, and you get taught this quite early on in school, really, with art and stuff, that like every interpretation's valid. What it means to you is perfectly valid. That's acceptable. You know, people in the art world love to do this of like, it's so much about what the viewer, what the audience brings to the piece rather than what the intention is. And, you know, famously, Roland Barthes did the whole death of an author thing about saying that the author doesn't matter, authorial intention doesn't matter. Once someone creates a piece of art, it exists in the world, and then what it means to you is what it means. Like, you know, that is valid. If that's true, if that's how the art world thinks, then surely if an AI creates something that is beautiful, it is beautiful. It doesn't matter that there was no intention. It doesn't matter that there's no ghost in the machine, that there's no soul. It's like it just exists as a thing, and therefore it can be, you know, if it makes you feel something, it makes you think something, then it's beautiful in its own way. And I think, you know, anyone could easily say 2 years ago, anyone could look at some art created by an AI and be like, that's kind of crap. Like, it's just like, looks like a bit of a mess. And now you can look at something that's created by an AI and be like, that's beautiful. That's amazing. That's stunning. That's scary. That's like, makes me feel happy. That's, you know, exciting, whatever. It can make you feel stuff and it can make you think stuff. And it's like, it doesn't necessarily matter that there's any intention behind it, because and it's different. You know, a painting created by a human and a painting created by an AI, while I personally probably would struggle to tell the difference in lots and lots of situations, I still think both can be valid and both can be different and like worth something in their own right. So both of those things, like the ethics of like plagiarism, I don't think will be an issue very, very soon. I think like kind of the boat's already gone, you know, like the horse is already gone. You can shut the barn door if you want, but it doesn't matter. I kind of think that's gone now, or will be soon. And this idea of like, art created by an AI or writing created by an AI isn't going to be as good as what a human can do. I think that's wrong. I think it'll be different to what a human can do. And it might be, you know, and similarly, humans can write a lot of crap and AI will create tons of crap, but they might create something really cool that humans couldn't have thought of. And that's an interesting thing in itself. Anyway, now let's get on to the main meat of this. How's it going to be used in games? I want to rattle through this. So, like, this is going to be definitely a quick run through my mind and how AI could be used in gaming with some examples and stuff like that. We might revisit this topic because I think it's so interesting and I don't want to go on forever. So, first of all, we've been talking about art. Think about all of the art in gaming that could be created by AI. I remember like when games like GTA 5 came out and Assassin's Creed Origins and, you know, these huge games, Skyrim, I guess, these huge games came out and it started feeling like games can't get much bigger. I know like games like Daggerfall have already been out where they're like the size of the UK, but games traditionally like that, like Daggerfall, use procedural generation. So they generated the map, generated the world procedurally. And lots of games do this nowadays. You know, Minecraft does it famously. And there's like fairly simple, straightforward rules governing how stuff is created. And it's like, if you do this, you can iterate it as many times as you want, and it will keep on coming up with something kind of new that's never been done before. But it generally won't be that interesting. It generally won't be that like exciting. With the new sort of developments in AI, it's entirely possible that you could make something that is interesting, that is exciting. And, you know, it's the same basic principle. You're still procedurally generating things. But now you can make things where it's like, hey, this can have a history. This can have some sort of like incentive. You could say like, hey, computer, I want you to make like a mountain, and in the mountain, I want there to be a series of tunnels, and in the middle of that tunnel, in the middle of that set of tunnels, there's going to be a big cave full of gold with a dragon sitting on top of it, and I want the tunnels to be set up so like they're trapped and they've got enemies in them and stuff like that. You'll be able to like create stuff like that, and it will create something. And again, it won't necessarily be as good, at least at first, as something that was created by humans, but that's a lot more interesting than a lot of the stuff that exists now. And the idea that if you're creating something like that with that small amount of work, and then it's generated and it's generating art, it's generating character models, it's generating new creatures that haven't been seen anywhere else in the game. It's generating this dragon because it has an idea of what a dragon should be. And it's generating, maybe new weapons that fit thematically with that area. Imagine the sort of game you could create with that, where it's just like, essentially, again, we're going back to stuff like this isn't entirely new. Like this idea kind of already exists. No Man's Sky already exists, where there's tons of CG generated planets where some of them are like, this is a planet where it's super cold everywhere, and look at the sort of animals and plants that grow on a super cold planet, and look at the sort of landscape that's been created for it. This planet is tiny. Look at like what happens when you've got a tiny planet. And stuff like that like already exists, and it's just going to get much deeper and much more complex. And it means that huge worlds can be created without the need for there to be like, development times of 20 years and like 5,000 developers working on it. Like the people, Hello Games, who made No Man's Sky, is an incredibly small team in Guildford, and they managed to make like essentially an entire like galaxy, isn't it really? And it's interesting. Like the stuff in No Man's Sky, you can find interesting planets. You can find a lot of boring planets, but it's pretty interesting. With this new AI stuff, you're going to be able to make all of that stuff much more complex, much more deep, and have some kind of potential intention. You can even go to the scale of being like, okay, I'm going to train this AI on games like all of the Zelda games. And then it's like, hey, make a new dungeon. Make a new dungeon. But this one, make it like, I don't know, make the new dungeon bow and arrow themed, and then it will create a new dungeon based on bow and arrows. It can do automated testing to run through it and check that it's playable, check that it actually works, check that a human could do it. And then every player could get a slightly different dungeon. Every player could get a dramatically different dungeon. Who knows? It sounds a bit like Starfield is doing this. So Starfield, they've already said, Todd Howard's talked about the idea that there's going to be tons of planets you can go to in Starfield. Only a few of them are like handcrafted and made for the quests. They'll have characters that are made for everything. But you will be able to go to other planets and you'll be able to explore and you'll find loot and you'll find characters and stuff like that. Like they will exist and they will be there, but only a few of them will be the ones that are like handcrafted. And it just, if you want to ignore that, you can, but they're there and they won't have cost the development team quite as much as making like 1,000 handcrafted planets. And to me, that's really exciting. To me, the idea of being able to be a player and find something that no one else has ever seen before is quite a big draw. And it was a big draw for No Man's Sky, for Minecraft, Terraria. Like, the thought of seeing something that no one else did. You know what? The first game where I really felt that was F-Zero. I think it was the N64 one, F-Zero X, where if you finished a whole game, you got a final track, and it was like a randomly generated track. And me and my friends would play it and just keep on generating tracks, because every now and then, bear in mind in F-Zero, you're racing like super fast hover cars, and there's like 30 of them in a race. Every now and then, it would create one where like there'll be a corner so sharp that nearly every AI craft just went flying off the corner, and it would be ridiculous. And like we really enjoyed that, being like, no one else has ever seen this track before, like no one else has experienced this thing before. So yeah, I think AI creating stuff like that will be really interesting. And the fact that you'll have AI creating the art means that, like, say in Jedi Survivor, right now, you go to a number of different locations, but when you go to those different locations, a lot of the time the enemies are the same. Sometimes, they'll have a slightly different color palette, but they're basically the same enemy. Imagine if you had it so like every planet you go to, every location you go to, has completely bespoke character models that can still follow some of the same rules, but they look different, they act slightly differently, they like have different qualities to them. And like, wherever you went in Starfield, there were completely different types of enemies to fight. And it's like, at the moment, the problem is that you can't test all of those different things. Some of them aren't going to be interesting to fight. A lot of them won't be interesting to fight. But as AI gets better, I think that's something that will improve heavily. The idea of trying to create something that can and will be interesting. Again, going back to like Midjourney and stuff like that, right now, you can give it a very simple prompt and it will create something that I would say is interesting. Whereas 2 years ago, it would have created something that wasn't interesting. It was just a weird mess. And that's kind of super interesting. One other thing I thought about this, and I thought about it for Call of Duty particularly, is you could use it to create menus. And this is something I haven't seen people talk about very much. Imagine if in Call of Duty, you could say to the game, like literally over the microphone, like, hey, can you show me a menu where I could see all of my friends' loadouts and compare their kill death ratios with each loadout that they've got set up? And then it's just like, okay, and it works out how to present that information to you. That would be cool. Like, that would be awesome. And like, I know UX design is a big complicated thing at the moment, but surely that sort of thing where it just looks at all of the other user interfaces that it's already got, and then it considers the type of information you're asking for and is like, okay, I can combine these things and make a new menu that shows you just the information you want. That would be awesome. Like, that would be super cool. And I think, stuff like that will happen. Anyway, let's get on to some other topics, because we're definitely going to overrun. That's the first one. I've got like pages of this stuff, but I'm getting carried away because I'm really enjoying it. AI in writing. We talked a bit about writing and how a lot of video game writers are very worried about their jobs. I don't think their jobs are particularly at risk. I think like what's going to happen is you'll still have humans creating the main story for games, and then you'll have AI creating like the background filler stuff that surrounds it. Like, you'll be able to essentially design a universe, design a world, explain the rules of it, and then have the AI do all of the background filling stuff of being like, okay, it understands what this universe is based on the writing you've already done. It can now fill out the rest and create an entire world that's like fleshed out based on the things that you've said, and fill it with slightly richer, more interesting stuff that might not be, it won't be as good as the stuff that's created by a human, but it'll definitely be more interesting than having AI that don't talk or just grunt when you walk into them. So I think things like, NPC dialogue and RPGs, you go into a village. Imagine if, one thing that AI can do that humans can't is it can create new things on the fly. So, like, imagine if you're playing Skyrim and you've got ChatGPT doing the AI, which I think is actually a mod that someone's made, and it doesn't work very well right now because there's a big delay and stuff, but, stuff like that will get better. But imagine if they react to stuff that you've done in the world. It's like, imagine if you just spent, like, 20 hours in Skyrim trying to smash every vase in a dungeon, and you had, like, an NPC character come with you, and then you go back to town and someone's like, oh, wow, we heard you went to that dungeon, like, how was it? And then the person who was with you looks at you and is like, he just spent 20 hours smashing every vase in there. I think this guy's insane. Like, that stuff like that would be super cool. And it just doesn't exist at the moment in gaming. That kind of, the text reacting to what you're doing in the world, I think could be awesome. It's something that, like, Peter Molyneux always talked about and got mocked for with Fable. He said there's going to be all this stuff about how you affect the world and how people will remember you. And you plant an acorn and then 20 years later there'll be a tree. All of this stuff, and it's like we're getting closer to stuff like that being a reality of, like, you butchered an entire town that the developers didn't think that you would ever do, and then you go to the next town and now, like, what about if people react to you because of what you just did, even though the developers didn't think you were going to be able to do that? What about, like, imagine that famous thing in Skyrim where people were stealing stuff by putting pots over the heads of the vendors so they couldn't see when they were stealing stuff. Imagine if, like, the AI was written in a way where it's like, hey, we heard you keep putting pots on people's heads. Can you stop doing that, please? Like, just little things where it's like acknowledging exactly what you've been doing and then coming up with a passably human way to react to it. And that's the point. It doesn't have to be like one-to-one, like exactly believable, but it could be so immersive just by being a bit closer to what humans could do. And similarly, like, I was thinking, going back to Call of Duty, I want to kind of use Call of Duty all the way through this. Like, what about background chatter in FPS games, like in Call of Duty? At the moment, I'm always kind of surprised, and you're playing Call of Duty, sometimes you'll hear the voice lines, they'll be like, hey, there's enemies in the elevator, or like, oh, there's people in the courtyard, and stuff like that. And I always think that's kind of cool, that it's like a little bit more specific to what's actually happening in the game. Imagine if it was actually using the players' names and stuff, it was sort of like, hey, there's Love God 420 is like coming along the gantry or something like that, or like, so saying like, oh, watch out, like, this guy's just switched to a sniper again. Or saying like, hey, that sniper from earlier, the sniper that killed you last time, he's moved over here now. Just like having more organic things that's actually based on exactly what's happening. It's like, maybe you could even have the AI getting frustrated by so many players. Obviously, you have to be careful about what players call themselves, and I'm sure a lot of companies will be very happy that have spent a long time trying to train rules for like what's acceptable and what's not. But again, AI could be used for that. It will work out what's acceptable and what's not. Like that's already a thing in a lot of the chatbots, where people have to put in limits and rules to stop them from being racist or stop them from saying stuff, using slurs and things like that. What about like collectible texts, like reflecting what your player does? So, when you're finding all of those little lore things, like in Redfall, you're going around, you're finding those little notes of paper and stuff like that. What about if instead of it always being about stuff that happened before you started the game, which is generally how these things work, instead it was like characters who have like been hiding and then they heard stuff that you were just doing. You were using like a bunch of explosives, take someone out, and then you go into a house and find someone scribbled a note being like, I heard all these explosions outside, like I wonder what's happening. Just things reacting to what you're doing, I think would be interesting. And then even the point of, having entire AI driven quests, like, whether it's just side quests, I don't know. But Skyrim tried to do this a bit. There's those, what are they called, like dynamic quests or something, where you get some quests where it's like, hey, can you go here and find this object? And there's a bit of dialogue and stuff, and it's all kind of procedurally generated. It's all created so it's kind of, you just don't ever run out of quests to do. Having more stuff like that, where it's like in Starfield, any planet you land on, have it like, Star Trek episode of the week type stuff, where there's going to be someone there and they are going to have a problem and you can like work with them to solve it. But it's all written using AI. I think could be really cool. And like, it wouldn't matter that much that the quality wasn't as good as the human written ones, because it's like, you could just entirely ignore it. It's just like an extra bit of flavor for the world. And I think like in the next couple of years, that's what we'll see all of this stuff used for, is for like flavor, just enriching the world, enriching the environment. Then a couple of other things that they might get used for. Cheat detection. This is something that I'm sure, again, already happens. But like, imagine if, rather than, and I imagine this is probably somewhat how Ricochet works, imagine if rather than telling cheat detectors exactly what they have to do and programming in things to look for, imagine if it just said, hey, we've got 10,000 games by 10,000 different players. 4 of these people were cheating, and you train the AI up on it, and then you train it up on exactly and say, hey, these 4 were cheating. Now here's another 10,000 games, work out which 4 were cheating. And it keeps on iterating through that again and again and again with loads and loads of like data. And then it will start picking up on patterns that humans wouldn't think of. Things that people who are cheating do, that people who aren't cheating don't do. I reckon it could get a lot more accurate than humans could. It's going to be a lot better than like bloody Bad Boy Beeman or anything like that. It's going to be like actually working out, okay, these are the giveaways. These are the things you can tell just by watching the way that they're playing, that shows you that they're definitely cheating. And then beyond that, it could even go to the point of like working out the most effective way to counter it. I've said for a long while, people often say, oh, there's these people who have been cheating and they've been cheating for a week and they haven't been banned yet. And they see that as a bad thing. But it's like, if you think about it, that's the best way to ban cheaters, is to wait a while, let them think they're getting away from it, away with it. Then the cheat developers will keep on selling it to more people who are willing to buy cheats. Like, it will get out there because they think, hey, this one isn't being detected, so everyone can use it. Give them a false sense of security and then ban them all at once. That way you catch a lot more people who are willing to buy cheats, and you cost the cheat developers a lot more money because they publish stuff that actually was being detected the whole time, but they just didn't know about it. That's a much more effective strategy rather than just as soon as you think someone's cheating, ban them immediately. Like, that just doesn't work, because then the cheat developers can test something, get banned immediately on that account and be like, okay, we can't do that because it detects it. You really don't want them to know what's being detected. You really don't want the cheat developers to know what's actually being picked up on. And AI could be used to test different ways of messing with the cheat developers to find out, okay, when we did this, this caught a lot more people. This had a bigger impact, like, rather than something else. And again, it might come up with stuff that humans wouldn't have thought of. Just identify patterns that other people didn't. And then also think about AI in development. So, like, again, AI has already been used in development, but what about AI creating new mechanics? What about AI being, like, used to do stuff where it's like, okay, in this game, like, one thing that I always thought was fun was in Morrowind, so the old Elder Scrolls game, one of the old Elder Scrolls games, you could create your own spells and enchantments, and you could do crazy stuff in there. You could be like, hey, I want something, famous ones, like, I want something that's going to make me 100% invisible, or make me to be able to jump thousands of feet into the air, or make me be able to run insanely fast, or stuff like that. And you could kind of break the game by doing it. imagine stuff like that where the game shifts to match what you want to do. So, you have some power and it's like, I want to create this and it's going to let me do this. And the game shifts around within the rules it has. I've been like, okay, the AI can create the animation, the sound effects, all of that stuff that works with what you want it to do. And like someone was saying in chat earlier, the idea, I think Strong Dose was saying, Treebeard said about being able to create your own game like in Fortnite's creative mode, but with less input. This idea of actually being able to take those things, like those game creators, and saying like, okay, can you write me the code or can you create the mechanic for a player jumping? And then the AI does it, and then you test it out, and you say, okay, I want the jump to be a little bit higher. And like, what about, so now I want people to be able to grab onto ledges while jumping. And, the AI working out ways to do that, automating that process. So, like, there's still human intention involved in it, but the mechanics of it, rather than relying on human experience and needing to find someone who's done it before, instead you've got an AI that knows how to do it and can create something. And again, can like shift stuff and maybe do stuff that's a little bit creative, maybe find solutions that other people wouldn't have thought of. What about AI iterating over something already established by an artist? We've already talked about this. The idea, you put in a weapon skin in Call of Duty, you put in like 100 weapon skins of a certain style and then say to AI, hey, create 10,000 more of these. And it just creates tons of camos and it will give them names. It will give them like challenges to unlock for them. Just like saving people a lot of that work, where I imagine a lot of work in game development and in every industry, basically, you've got like someone coming up with a solution to a problem at one point, and they're normally the person who gets paid quite a lot of money, the engineer who finds it. And then you get a lot of people like interns, assistants, people who are less well paid, who are essentially just like implementing that over and over and over again, but with slightly different demands, slightly different variables and stuff like that. AI will be super good at doing that, of creating tons of stuff just to create more content for games. So games have a huge amount of content. What about even new maps for Call of Duty? You put all of the maps from Call of Duty into an AI and you say, okay, we want you to create 5 more. We want you to create one that's at an Arctic research station. We want you to create one that is in the Louvre. We want you to create one that is in a forest. And the AI is like, okay, I can kind of see where like the Call of Duty maps get their template from, where they get the function from, the things that they need, and then it creates stuff for you. And then it can run automated playtests to see if they work in the same way that they do on the human-made ones and keep tweaking stuff. Like stuff like that. Like right now, we're complaining, or at least I'm complaining, that Modern Warfare 2 has so few maps. Imagine if a Call of Duty game comes out and it's like, oh yeah, there's 1,000 maps on this. Like, maybe for some people that wouldn't be good because they like learning all the maps. But I'd love it if every time I played Call of Duty, I was on a brand new map that no one knew. I really enjoy playing Call of Duty when no one knows the maps. I think that's a lot of fun. When you play something like on the beta weekend and no one really understands it and everything's surprising, that'd be so cool. And new weapons as well, taking like looking at, okay, this is what a weapon is in Call of Duty. We want to make a new low rate of fire SMG that's quite accurate to a range, make a gun, and it makes something that looks sensible, has a sensible name, and does everything. Like, why not? I mean, Call of Duty doesn't need new guns, but stuff like that. And then finally, what about AI run tournaments and commentating? Well, actually, this isn't final. There's one more thing after this. But why not, Call of Duty, one of the problems I've seen Tactical Brit having is like, he's always looking for tournaments to practice for World Series of Warzone. Why have humans constantly creating these tournaments when essentially the format of them is pretty much the same? Why not have an AI create them and actually commentate over them as well? Like, look at what people say about different types of gameplay and stuff like that, and just constantly have tournaments running 24 hours a day. At any point, you can join a tournament. Other people will get match made with you, and then it'll be run. It'll be streamed somewhere, and your friends will be able to watch it. You'll be able to watch it back, and it'll have like the whole thing of like commentating, graphics up on the screen, everything like that. Like Call of Duty did a really cool thing with the private games where you can actually have all of the graphics and stuff like that up, like you're watching a CDL match, but it's just a private game with you and your friends. You can do that in Modern Warfare 2 now, and it's super fun. But you still have to like set up the games. You'd have to set up the tournament rules, send out the invites, all of that stuff. You could automate literally all of that and just have the whole thing run by AI, which would be awesome. Then we get onto the last thing, and this is the final thing. I know I've run through this quickly, but it's just all like lots of thoughts I just had. Literally, all of this I wrote out this morning, and it's just like this train of thoughts where I'm like, oh my God, AI could be so good. And this is my big prediction. This is the thing I talked about at the beginning, that I think you're going to be able to hold me to this, and this is going to happen, and I haven't heard anyone talk about it. I'm sure someone has had the same idea, but I think it's going to happen. I'm going to say within 2 years, but I reckon within this year, I think there's going to be streaming channels set up where there is a streamer playing a video game, and the entire thing, other than the video game itself, is AI generated. I think the streamer's going to be fake. Their commentary, all of that is going to be AI generated on the fly. They will actually be playing the game. Like, they will genuinely be playing the game, or the games as in the AI will be playing the game, and they will be interacting with chat. They will be talking about what they're doing in game. They will be coming up just with fun conversations. They could be talking about news and stuff like that. And I think it will be hard to tell whether they're real or not. That's what I think is going to happen. And they will interact with chat. They will talk to chat, and they could leave it running 24 hours a day. Imagine how much money you could make. Imagine the amount of money you could make by setting up something. If it didn't cost you very much, if it was essentially the cost of running one PC, and you could set up a stream that was running 24 hours a day, and it could be running on any game you want. So, it's not going to get tired. It's not going to get frustrated. It's not going to get low energy sometimes. It's not going to have to stop to eat or go to the toilet or anything. Just constant content based on game streaming. So it'll just be like my normal streams where I am playing a game. There's a little window of me sitting there talking to you. I respond to chat when they do stuff. I remember people in chat and stuff like that. All of that, I think, could be pretty much simulated by an AI, with the bonus of not having to stop. And I think that's going to happen. I think we're probably within the year, but at least I'm going to give myself a bit of leeway and say within 2 years, that's going to happen, that there's going to be some streams appearing, some streams that become very popular, and people start questioning whether there's anyone real, whether there's any human input into it at all. And I don't think there will be. I think there will be, companies will realize that this is a way to make money. It's a really similar thing to what's already happened with news. If you are used to searching for news on the internet, you will know that there's a lot of news articles that are created by bots. Like tons of news articles where you search for a particular thing, or guides. Guides are often created by bots, review lists, the top 10 best monitors, whatever. And they found ways to make something look quite a lot like a real web page, but actually it's just AI generated. And it means no matter how specific you look for something, you find a list, because I imagine it's somehow looking for search terms and then creating something based on your search term. And it's creating exactly the thing you're looking for. You could look up something like, what's the 10 best places to jump in Redfall? And then someone will make a website where it's got like screenshots and stuff. And if you really look at it, it's like kind of gobbledygook, but it looks pretty convincing. Stuff like that happens all the time. Like I'm always looking, best monitors of 2023, because I want to see like Tom's hardware list or PC Gamer or something. And then I'll find a million different things that are just created by some AI generated in order to sell a specific brand of monitor or a specific piece of software or something like that. I think it's going to happen with streams where you'll be like sitting there one day and being like, remember Split Second, that awesome Disney racing game that we were talking about earlier? I want to watch someone streaming that. And then you'll go on Twitch and there'll be someone streaming it, and they won't be real. There'll be someone playing it, and they will be interacting with chat. They will have been streaming for like 400 days straight, and they will be constantly playing it, and they'll be really good at the game as well because they're a bot. And they'll just be, but like a bot in a good way. And they'll just be doing everything that you would want a streamer to do. And that'll be super weird. You'll even get them collaborating with each other. You'll get them coming into each other's streams, playing games together, playing Street Fighter against each other. Street Fighter tournaments between bots that never end, and they could all have their own characters. You could find a streamer that's exactly what you want to see. Someone who's just like you, or someone who's just like the person of your dreams, playing the exact games you want to see them play, talking about the topics that you want to see them talk about. I think this is going to happen really, really soon. And it's kind of scary, because it's one of those things where, when I was a teacher, I spent a long while talking to kids about, they talk about what they want to do as careers and stuff. And sometimes you'd be like, that's a job that might not exist. I'd get kids saying they want to be truck drivers, lorry drivers. And I'd be like, I don't know if that's going to be something that's even going to be a job for humans by the time you're old enough to do it. Like, it's, self-driving vehicles and stuff like that seem to be the future. And same with, pilots and stuff like that. Imagine a number of people who wanted to be jet fighter pilots. And then you look at what's happening with drones and stuff like that. It's like, how long are we going to have humans inside the planes at all? And, even though, small, like jobs like supermarket attendants and stuff like that, most of the tills in all of my local supermarkets have been replaced by computers, by machines. Warehouse staff getting replaced by things. So, like, there's so many different things, delivery people. There's so many different things that have already been automated. And it's like, there's some jobs that you always think like, oh, but surely this isn't going to be automated. Like being a writer, being an artist, being a programmer. And they are. Like, it's happening. It's already a thing where people are like, if I was making an indie game and I needed a bunch of different 2D sprites for it, I'd be really tempted to look into, can an AI do this rather than me hire an artist for, £30,000 a year to do them. I'd be really tempted to see, hey, can I find an AI that can do this for me in like a couple of days for much less money? Like, I reckon you probably could. There's some like Vampire Survivors. Hey, you want to have loads of things to stop you from having to steal stuff from Castlevania? Let's just do this. Let's use this AI. You want, 2D pixel art vampire, and then it'll just like, well, not vampires because there aren't any vampires in Vampire Survivors. But yeah, like something like that, I think will definitely happen. And I think like for what I'm doing, content creation, it's got to that point just in the last couple of months where I'm like, with these Balenciaga videos, this is really the thing that's kicked a lot of this off for me. Those bloody Balenciaga videos, I'm like, there's gonna be a schism, I think. Well, no, actually, I'd say this. Last year, I thought there was going to be a schism. I thought there was going to be a split at some point between content and entertainment. I thought there was going to be a split where you would get the stuff, like you get the Minder stuff that's on TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram Reels and stuff like that, where it's just something that you're meant to watch for 30 seconds and then scroll past and never think about it again. And then you get the stuff that I do like this, where I'm talking to you and interacting with you and having like a deeper conversation. I thought there was going to be a split between those two things, like a bigger split in audience, because at the moment it's all muddled up together. I think there will be a divergence. Now I'm starting to think, actually content is just going to take over both sides of it, and it's going to be generated content, and humans are going to be very much not involved in it, because an algorithm's going to do a much better job than a human can. Like the algorithm that already detects, what videos you want to see on YouTube, what tweets you want to see on Twitter, what pictures you want to see on Instagram, what video you're most going to watch and like on TikTok. That algorithm, once it can create content as well, it's going to be able to create content in terms of making money much better than humans can. Much better. And I think there still will be a market for people who want something authentically human, who want something that's definitely got a person and intention behind it. But I think that's going to be a niche market. I think most people won't care. It's in the same way that, there's always been people with music who don't want the mass-produced stuff that's got loads of people writing songs and working together and artists just being the ones who perform stuff, but actually, like, it's not their experience, it's not their songs. There's always been, like, that side of the commercial side of music, and then there's been the more sort of, like, indie side of music that's more, like, honest, more real. And the commercial side's always been where the money is, and always been much, much bigger and much, much more popular. Regarding, people know that those people don't write their own songs. People know that they're auto-tuned and there's like a huge amount of money going into them. People don't care because the stuff is good. Like the music is good. The music is catchy. It makes you feel good. You can dance to it. People like it. The same thing's going to happen with movies and games and streams and content creation. That it's like, the more you can automate something to be creating something that people want, then the like authentic stuff that's flawed is going to be niche. It's going to be a smaller thing, and I think that's going to happen very, very quickly, and it's going to be quite shocking when it does happen. It's going to be quite a sort of a lot of people are going to lose their jobs, a lot of people are going to lose their livelihoods, and a lot of corporations are going to make an insane amount of money from it. Because, at the moment, finding a streamer that you like is a nightmare. Finding a content creator you like is really tough. But if there's like a billion content creators and some of them are created basically just for you, that's going to be a no-brainer. People are going to go to that. People are going to watch that. People already just go and watch like the news show that they like. People go, it doesn't care about what's the most authentic news for a lot of people. It's like, this is the news show that I enjoy. People, want to see sports presented in the way that they want to have it presented. I think that kind of personalization, individualization, and stuff like that, it has to be automated because of the nature of it, and it will be automated, and it will be much more successful than the crap that we're doing, which is scary. So that's a scary downer thought to leave you on. Anyway, I'm going to end the podcast there. It's crazy. I'm not going to go through loads of things that people have been saying. I apologize, but we're already overrunning by 20 minutes. I'm going to be streaming over on twitch.tv/Geeky Pastimes. It's actually going to be me. It's not going to be a bot or anything like that. So if you want to carry on this conversation, I'm more than happy to while I'm playing a little bit of Redfall. So hop on over to twitch.tv/Geeky Pastimes. I'll put the link in chat there, and we can carry on some of this conversation, hear what you have to say. But I am going to read everything you say now because I might do another episode about this. Also, last note, I'm not going to be here for 2 days now. I'm not going to be back with another podcast till Monday because I'm going to Sweden tomorrow to go on some roller coasters. So if you want to follow me on Instagram, it's just Geeky Pastimes on Instagram. I normally put up some pictures of my theme park trips, but there won't be anything else for a few days. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.